the original Legend of Zelda is remarkable for many reasons, a few of which include revolutionizing an entire genre of gaming and spawning one of the most recognizable and lauded franchises in video game history. I hear a lot about the original game, especially in comparison to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, such as its open world. You can do the dungeons in any order. The non-linearity makes it so much fresher than the restrictive order of the pre-Wild era games. There's a unique sense of freedom and exploration that only Breath of the Wild has been able to recapture. As a frequent connoisseur and recent addition to the Thunderdome that is ZeldaTube, it was time to put up or shut up. And so I recently finished a playthrough of the original Legend of Zelda's first quest to see if these attributes really held true, and here's what I found. Now I first want to bookend this with a confession and a concession. My confession is that I went into my playthrough of Zelda 1 heavily biased. "It is not open world," said I obstinately. "It constrains you way more than you think," said I stubbornly. But I didn't actually know if these things were true. And truth be told, I wasn't actually sure what open world really meant. That was my first mistake, because no one could seem to agree on a definition of what an open world is. Google the definition of open world and you get a map of A Link to the Past? We'll get to that in due course. But here are a few formal definitions. The through line between these three definitions is freedom, and less official sources add other elements like no load screens, and as my boy Redbeard says, no predetermined paths, multiple self-contained obstacles and experiences, some of which are optional, and the ability to choose the order in which content is consumed. Perhaps irrelevantly, it seems the greatest consensus is that open world is nothing more than a marketing ploy. Let's then approach this from the opposite direction. How much does Zelda 1 constrain the player? Now I want to be clear that I'm largely talking about the overworld here and how and in what order the game lets you explore that map to tackle its main, and really only, objectives, those being the dungeons. I'm in the throes of making a dungeon-related sequel to this video, so I'll talk about them in terms of the order they can be done, but we'll go into greater detail in the future. Anywho, here's the map of Zelda's Overworld. It is split into a grid 16 wide and 8 tall, totaling 128 tiles, which group to form distinct landscapes and landmarks. Now this looks pretty open, and I've heard it said that from the start you can reach all but 2 of these squares, here and here, which are only reachable once you've collected the raft from Dungeon 3. But there are actually 2 more points of contention I like to bring up. The first is this tile. You may notice the stairs cut off midway through the mountainside. That's because this tile acts similarly to the Lost Woods in the map's southwest corner, and that the tiles repeat themselves until you leave or maneuver them in a particular order. This is how you reach Dungeon 5. Now it is true that this can be brute forced, and relatively simply in this case, but there's actually quite a bit of telephone being played here prior to solving it. In Dungeon 4, this old man, who by the way can be bypassed, tells you to walk into the waterfall, which is a reference to this location, where this old woman charges you for the solution to this tile, and you have to give her the right amount or risk losing it, which is no small risk, as rupees are difficult to come by without greater knowledge of the overworld. Plus, if you haven't absorbed through cultural osmosis that in gaming, secrets are always behind waterfalls, you may never look here if you never run into that message in Dungeon 4. Similarly, until you get the raft from Dungeon 3, this entire portion of the map is locked unless you follow a similar sequence. This is intentional, as many of the more difficult enemies roam this western and northern portion of the map. But in the very southwest corner, you'll meet another old woman who is willing to gut Link's wallet in order to provide the solution to solving the Lost Woods. Here exists a similar rupee grinding risk, and the solution actually costs a different amount of rupees from the Dungeon 5 solution. There's no guarantee that when you first run across either of these old women, you'll have enough rupees to purchase the solution. We can call these soft locks. If you replay the game and know this information, it won't stop you from exploring the rest of the overworld, regardless of whether or not you've received the raft. So while I'd argue knowledge counts as a key which unlocks progression, it is not mandatory, as you only have to discover it one time to be able to carry it through additional playthroughs. In terms of hard locks, you cannot do the dungeons in any order, and certain dungeons absolutely cannot be completed before others. This includes Dungeon 1, which has to be done before Dungeon 6, Dungeon 4, which can only be completed once the raft is received from Dungeon 3. The ladder must be obtained from Dungeon 4 before Dungeon 5 and 6 can be completed. Dungeon 7 can't be completed without the flute from Dungeon 5. And all 8 main dungeons must be completed before entering the last dungeon that houses Ganon. Also, if you don't have the silver arrows, you can't beat Ganon. The silver arrows are found in the same dungeon, but if you've ever tried navigating it, dear God, is it truly dizzying. While this still offers a lot of ways to complete dungeons, these hard locks remain constant for every playthrough. Now, I've seen many a complaint about A Link to the Past, which I mentioned earlier, marking the map with the order in which the dungeons should be done. While some obvious explorative elements are lost because the locations are physically marked, the dungeons do not have to be done in that order, and finding ways to do them out of order further encourages creative exploration. I think it's strange that the original numbers the dungeons, and from what I've seen, a lot of people complete them in sequential order, but also refer to them as a suggestion. But when A Link to the Past is talked about, also from what I've seen, that order is often considered definitive. And even though the original's dungeons can be done out of order, there is clearly an intended order, there being a steep and evident difficulty curve after Dungeon 4. If you run into a high-numbered dungeon early, good luck. You may want to keep exploring or risk getting constantly ground to fine powder by a gauntlet of strong enemies. But if our measure of freedom or constraint is going to be defined by the total combination of dungeon orders, then something interesting emerges. The original has a staggering number of combinations, 672. But even A Link to the Past has a total of 66 dungeon combinations, almost 3 times as many as Breath of the Wild's Divine Beast combinations, still more even if you include Hyrule Castle, and still more than Tears of the Kingdom's temple orders. Although some think there are up to 7 dungeons, in which case the point is moot. By this metric, Ocarina of Time is decidedly more non-linear than many will give it credit for, as the adult dungeons have 14 combinations. And the original isn't even top dog. That title belongs to A Link Between Worlds, with some 5,000 combinations. But no one in their right mind would ever argue that A Link to the Past is more open or provides more freedom than either Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. So here's my concession. The original Zelda is indeed an open world, but not completely. The combination of its hard and soft locks grants relative freedom, a freedom which is compounded the more familiar you are with the game. But it's also true that defining the entire series by the linearity of each game is ridiculous, unproductive, and reductive. What defines the original Zelda is not how open its overworld is. The secret sauce this game runs on is actually way more intriguing. But what is that secret sauce, and why is it important? Will it prove that Breath of the Wild is closest to the original in its design philosophy? Will I slowly drift into oblivion as I lose more and more of my sanity exploring these completely inconsequential topics? Find out on the next episode of Dragon Ball Z.